All right. I also wanted to show how some of these structures sit inside of the cranium as well. I forgot to do that as well. I thought that would be helpful as well. So I'm going to start with the durovenous sinuses just so we can see how they sit inside the actual brain and not just the pathway of the structures themselves. All right. So let me remove this. Okay, perfect. Yep. All right. So if I remove the two parietal lobes, right, I can see the superior sagittal sinus. You can see it going from the crista galli all the way to the occipital bone, superior sagittal sinus. Right, and then we can see the confluence of sinuses right there. If I remove the occipital bone, right, this is the confluence of sinuses right here. Let me, right, so this is the confluence of sinuses if I remove the occipital bone. Let me just get the bone back. Okay, I'm gonna remove, put back the occipital bone. Right, so we saw where the confluence of sinuses is, so it's right there. So like right there. Disregard the straight sinus. So then we move into our transverse sinuses. So we went from superior sagittal sinus, confluence of sinuses, to transverse sinus. And then from there we go into the sigmoid sinus. So if I examine, from there we go into the sigmoid sinus. And then we have our cavernous sinus, right, which drains into the internal jugular vein. So don't worry about all these connection branches because our cavernous sinus is draining into the internal jugular vein through all these other structures you don't need to worry about. Right? All of these structures are draining into the internal jugular vein. And also, if I remove the temporal bone, you can see the internal jugular vein. If I remove this temporal bone as well, I don't know why it's cut so many times, but right, so we can see the internal jugular vein there and the internal jugular vein there as well. So our sinuses are draining our superior transverse cavernous sigmoid, right? All these sinuses are draining into the internal jugular vein and going straight back to the heart. And now we can see how those look inside the actual brain. So I'm going to highlight them one more time and then we're going to move on to the circle of Willis so you guys can see that inside of the brain. All right, so transverse sigmoid cavernous. There's a bunch of other sinuses you guys don't need to worry about, but I'm going to connect them just so you guys can see that they're all connected and draining into the internal jugular vein. So, right, so internal jugular vein, internal jugular vein. You can see how all these sinuses are draining into internal jugular vein on each side. And I'm going to remove the frontal lobe just so we can see a little bit better. I hope that makes sense. Now that we have that, I'm going to move to this here, the circle of Willis, and I'm going to show you So usually you're gonna find the circle willis on the actual brain, how I showed you there. But just so you can see it here in the skull as well. All right, you have the vertebral arteries, and then you also have the internal carotid arteries. All right, so if I remove the parietal bone, right, you can see the vertebral joining to form the basilar, right, and then from our basilar we form our posterior cerebral arteries, right and left, and then from our posterior cerebral arteries you form the posterior communicating, which is right here, posterior communicating artery, and then also blood is coming in from the internal carotids, and then you see blood going to the middle cerebral artery on each side, and then also we see blood going into the anterior cerebral artery as well, right and left side, and then you have an anterior communicating artery connecting your two anterior cerebral arteries. All right, so if I examine, all right, this is how the circle willis would look for how we are for the scope of this class, basically. All right. All right. So also I want to go over the last thing that I spoke about in the previous video, the ventricle system. So, and I just want to show you the where the cerebellum is going to sit as well. So let me just type in cerebellum. I think I just messed it up. There we go. Okay. So here we go. It's not showing the hypothalamus. Okay, there we go. All right, let me remove that. Okay, here we go. So I wanted to show you just the brain inside of the cranium. So remember, the parietal bone would be here. Right, parietal bone would be here, and then temporal bone would be here. That's what we just removed. So I'm gonna put it back real quick. And then temporal bone. There we go. Okay, sorry that took so long. Okay, so if I remove the parietal bone, if I remove the temporal bone, right now I'm seeing inside of the actual cranium, I'm seeing half of the cerebral hemisphere, right? This is the cerebellum, right? It's resting in the inferior aspect of the occipital lobe, right? So if I remove the cerebellum, right, I'm seeing the other half, the right half of the cerebellum. And I also wanted to show you the sphenoid, right? This is the sphenoid bone, right? You have the hypophyseal fossa, and then you have your pituitary gland, right, which is connected to the infundibulum, which is then connected to the hypothalamus. I thought I pressed hypothalamus before, but hypothalamus. Okay, there we go. Finally. All right, So we said we see the hypophysiofossa. Right, the sphenoid bone is right here. Then we have the pituitary gland, which is connected to the infundibulum, which is then connected to the hypothalamus, right? And then this is the other aspect of the thalamus, but we're not really seeing it completely. We're only seeing the interthalamic adhesion, which connects the right and the left thalamus, right? Then we see the third ventricle, right? I just want to give you guys an image of how the brain actually sits inside of the cranium. And that's about it. Remember, we see our midbrain, our pons, medulla oblongata. So if we solidify that, solidify that. So midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata, midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata. We see our fourth ventricle back here. If I remove that fourth ventricle, cerebral aqueduct is somewhere over here. Third ventricle, lateral ventricle, right? And then thalamus over there. That's about it. So I hope that was helpful for seeing a different perspective of those structures that we saw just directly solely on the brain. And again, good luck, guys. Have a great rest of your week.